First of all, thank you for such a nice introduction. So today we're going to discuss about AWS misconfiguration from the attacker side view, right? So just a second, let me set this up. Yeah. So I'm skipping the about me right now. So to what is all about, right? So what are we covering today? So I will be discussing AWS cognitive misconfiguration, S3 misconfiguration, then misconfigure IAM policy and EC2 misconfiguration. Then we also talk about how you can use the HTML injection vulnerability to get AWS temporary credential, right? So what you can expect that I will be covering approach, not the step-by-step procedure, because it's quite, I have to cover everything within a 25 minutes. So it will be quite brief. So let's start with the AWS cognitive misconfiguration, right? So before we start understanding what are the possible misconfiguration for AWS Cognito, let's first discuss how the Cognito works. Because to understand misconfiguration of that part, you have to have the clear understanding what it stands for. So there are three main identity. I could say two main. First is user pool and second is the identity pool. So user pool, when you do the sign up, right, or the signing, that comes in the picture, user pool. Identity pool is being used for the authorization purpose. So ideal approach, you authenticate and get the tokens. What kind of token? Refresh, then access key ID, all this token you get, right? So using those token, you get the AWS credential, and using those credential, you will have the access to the other services. So this is how the identity pool and the user pool comes in the picture. Now you must be wondering, hey, how, like, okay, we know this. What are the possible misconfiguration, right? So to discuss that, I just summarize that how the Cognito works, how the user pool look like in the sign up page, identity pool, right? But keep this mind, this key point, right? Amazon Cognito has the authenticated and the unauthenticated mode to generate AWS credential for user. Why? Don't worry, I will be discussing that how this can be helpful to us. So before we started, we should just discuss what could be a possible attack vectors, right? So first, misconfigure AWS Cognito attributes. Second is the hard-coded identity pool ID. Third is the AWS Cognito misconfigure, allow to sign up the new user, right? If you are feeling like, hey, what's going on? Don't worry, I will be covering upcoming. Then identity pool ID present in HTTP response. Like if you are capturing the Bob request, right, and you see the identity pool ID present in the HTTP response, and the liberal AWS permission has been assigned. What do you mean by that? I will be covered soon. So let's start with the, now I discuss, right, that hey, hard coded pool ID being stored, or the identity pool getting disclosed in HTTP response. So this is one example, that is you are getting hard coded pool ID and you are getting the pool ID in the HTTP response, right? But you might be thinking, hey, like this is not confidential info, like identity pool ID or the app client, right? So, okay, what else can be done? So question to be asked to yourself while testing this or looking for misconfiguration, you should ask that how the disclosure of app client ID, user pool ID, or the identity pool ID can help me to exploit this. Okay, so you figure out exploitation part. And for that, I'll suggest try to get the fetch temporary credential. Now you must be wondering, hey, how can I do that? So for that, I suggest like there are two ways. Okay, either you can use the Bob Suite, either you can just use the Python script, where you just explicitly in the Python script where you just explicitly mention, hey, this is the pool ID and this is the region, and you will get the temporary credential, right? And you don't want to go for the Python script, right? What you can use Bob Suite, like go look for the HTTP request, that is having the identity pool ID and try to get the identity ID. Okay, so if you are getting that, okay, as an unauthenticated user, then try to get the temporary credential. As I mentioned, right, the identity pool ID will help to get the temporary credential. So try to get those AWS credentials. And while you are looking into the HTTP request, so this is the API call you have to look for, and you will be finding, hey, this is the API call being made when you try to get the identity ID. And this is what the API call being made when you try to get a temporary credential from the identity ID. Okay. So this is the standard approach to get the temporary credential, just by knowing the identity pool ID. If if the application or the environment has not properly configured for the cognitor, right? If it's allowing unauthenticated user, right, then it's a issue. Now, what if access to unauthenticated identity was disabled? So we have discussed that unauthenticated identity was able to get all this credential, right? But what if it say you are providing an identity pool ID and say, hey, you are not able to access this? So are you just stop it over here? No, what you have to check for, check if application expose some functionality like unintentionally via cognitive misconfiguration. For example, they are verifying, okay, this pool ID, but what if API client app client ID being disclosed? Okay, so if it disclosed, this is not an issue, but if you do exploitation part, this is issue, right? So to exploit that, check if confirmation was sent to the attacker specified email ID with the confirmation code. Okay, so when you intercept the request, so when you have the in the request the mail ID, try to change to your attacker mail ID and see if you are getting the confirmation, like you can see in the response itself, right? Now, to second thing to look for, check if the user account can be confirmed from the token you received, right, on the registered mail, right? After that, check if application validated a newly created user and return the access token, right? So if the application is validating, hey, you are the valid user, even though you are not, you have used your attacker email ID, right? And you are able to get those credentials, and eventually you are getting the AWS credential. Now you have the AWS credential where you will have the access, right, to the services. So this is how you can look around. I can talk more about this, I can cover the mind map around it. So for the approach section, right? But do you say, okay, this is all the misconfiguration can happen. Like, what can go wrong except this? So sensitive details present in server response, including cognitive pool ID, app client ID. We have discussed, right, how the app client ID can be helpful to us. Then AWS Cognito misconfigured to allow sign up as a new user, the one we have talked about. Providing the liberal permission and the allows an unauthenticated user to access sensitive AWS services, right? So again, like if you have the credential, right, and you are providing the liberal access, like instead of providing just access to S3, right, you are providing access to whole AWS, right, then you will be in trouble. Or you haven't defined that, hey, this should be only accessible to this user. Eventually you are providing a whole infrastructure or the any bucket that is sensitive, that should not be visible to another user, right? You are providing access to that. That is again the issue. Now the improper validation for the identity ID and allowing the user to fetch temporary credential, like which we have discussed first, right? So yeah. Now second will be the S3 misconfiguration. Like most of people are aware about it, that yeah, so many breaches are going on. And but what are the misconfiguration that leading to this breaches, right? So main cause, allowing public access to buckets. So you are simply just saying, hey, this is the bucket and anyone on the internet can access this bucket, right? So this is again trouble. If you think from the attacker perspective, right? If you put your bucket publicly accessible, right? So anyone on the internet can access that bucket and download any sensitive information, right? Or view the any sensitive information. Then defining full control access to authenticate AWS user group. So I have seen most of people say, hey, we have properly mentioned that only authenticated user. But that is again wrong. You have to explicitly mention that, hey, this is a user or the group of the user are allowed. Okay, don't just allow any people on the internet. Authenticated people on the internet can have the full access control. Don't do that, because if I'm a attacker, I have the valid AWS account. I can simply read your data. I just like configure my profile and say, hey, I want to access this data. And if you have provided me full control, I can just remove the data or update the data in the bucket itself. So it's compromising whole CIA triangle, right? So it could be a critical issue. And now another misconfiguration I've seen that you define the policy with like any organization, like you say, oh, we are safe, we are providing just read access policy, but please make sure that the bucket is not having any sensitive information, right? And stop providing right access to everyone in the group. Okay, please mention the user groups that should have the access this. And most common, forgetting to encrypt your AWS resource, right? For example, think of the scenario, right? The attacker got the access to S3 bucket, but it's encrypted, right? So even though attacker has the visibility to read the your S3 bucket data, but he will not able to see what is present because it's encrypted. So it's best practice to encrypt your S3 bucket data. So yeah, so this is the standard attack vector. Now you say, okay, I'm aware about all these things, so what can go wrong? But how do I find the S3 bucket, right? So for that, either you can opt out for Google search, Google Doc. There are tools as well, Shodan, Sense. Either you can use the OSN tools like Sublister or AMAS. You can even use the brute force naming convention, is because for S3 it's like quite known naming convention, so you can brute force around it, or you can use certificate transparency log or gray hat warfare bucket, right? These all you can use. There are numerous scripts available on GitHub that can be also be used to find S3 buckets. Now I have given this screenshot that how do you find this is like publicly available S3 bucket where you find the information. And like for like I talk about the Google Doc, right? So how do you find? So you simply say site S3 Amazon AWS.com and you say mentioning URL assessment. Here you can ask for the financial information, credit card details, right? So this all can be done with the help of just by doing Google Doc. Okay. So if you remember, right, below security incident shows the dangers of the misconfigured S3 buckets. So you must be aware about that, what happened, right? This S3 misconfiguration allows to attacker to get access to the below users, and that is targeting the millions of users, right? So this is how dangerous it could be, and it could be like if we are vulnerable to this or has been breached, right, that could be chances that you will be charged by millions of billions money. So it's what to not to miss this S3 misconfiguration. Now I have seen most of people are missing the AWS IAM policy related, like so we are going to discuss how misconfigure IAM policy allows least privileged users to get admin level access. You will be like, hey, how can the least privileged can get the admin level access, right? So for that, if you notice, right, there are 5 policy available, and V1 is the default, but there is a policy before, right, that is having the admin level access. Now think of the attack scenario. Okay, so if I'm a user, I'm having the limited permission, I'm just having V1 default and I'm just able to read the data, right? But I can see there are 5 policy has been present. Let me just enumerate what the permission it has, and meanwhile I say, okay, there is a policy with V4. Can I make it default? If I can make it default policy, then instead of having the read-only access, I can have the full admin level access, right? This is what you don't want. It could be like, so there are two possible. One, if you are credential being clicked as a low privilege user, and either it could be an internal threat as well. Like if I'm within a company, but I got that, hey, this is the misconfiguration, then I can do the admin level access. You have the assumption that, hey, I can do just read only access, but eventually I'm making my self as an admin just by using the this overly permissive policy that has been like long back created, right? So what was the approach so far? As I have mentioned, right? So if we are from the attacker, right? If we are not the internal threat, you found any hardcoded credential, right? Then you try to enumerate permission, right? And you got the IAM related access. And then you try to enumerate policy. Hey, what are the policy available? And you found that, hey, policy has the admin level access, and you try to make it default. And this is how the privilege escalation works. If you think from the internal thread, right? These all started from here. IAM related access. You see what are the policy attached to you, right? And you found that, hey, there is an admin level access, so you get the administrative level access. So yeah, so these are the things you have to take care of it. So if you think, right, like I know this happened, like, but what went wrong? So multiple policy version with overly permissive configuration for the older version, right? So if you talk about V2, V3, V4, oh, all are the older or the expired, you can say, but you like long back you have created, but you forgot to remove this, or you have provided overly permissive, right? So these are the root cause. And yeah, one thing, and the attacker is able to make this overly permissive policy as the default policy. That is causing this whole issue, that how the even internal threat can happen, or even the attacker can use this, right? So yeah, now we have discussed about AWS Cognito S3 misconfiguration, right? So we can't miss the EC2 misconfiguration as well. So when you talk about EC2 misconfiguration, like what you should look for, right? So like question to ask yourself, is there EC2 instance accessible to public user? Is there any port open? If you find the EC2 instance, right? Is web application running on EC2 instance IP address? Like if you find the public IP address of the EC2 instance, right? Then look if there is web application running. Why I'm asking, I will cover that scenario as well. And is default configuration being used? Like default configuration you are using, right? So if the application is vulnerable to SSL, attacker can get the like AWS temporary credential, or even can just access, or your EC2 instance is publicly accessible, right? So don't opt out for default configuration. Now you say, hey, you said find the EC2 instance that is publicly accessible, right? How do I find this? So you should opt out for like site, Google Doc or Shodan. This is how I mentioned, right? And then I found one IP address, right, for the EC2 instance. See if you can just get the web application. So we found that, hey, web application is running on port 80. So your approach should be, hey, web application is running on the EC2 instance. Is it web application is vulnerable to SSRF? If yes, then role attached to that. Yes, then try to get the IAM role credential, right? So we found that, hey, yeah, I'm able to get that, and just configure the profile and try to get the S3 bucket data. And here I found that, hey, I'm able to get the credit card details and other admin credential as well. So this is how dangerous it could be if you are presenting like your EC2 instance is publicly available, or the web application hosted on EC2 instance, right? So approach so far, EC2 instance was publicly accessible, right? Then we found that, hey, web application running on the EC2 instance, and okay, web application running, but what is the vulnerability? So we found that, hey, this is vulnerable to SSRF and role is being attached to that user. Try to get the retrieve instance metadata. And then here we have the S3 bucket data, access to S3 bucket and sensitive information without encryption, right? But what if there is no direct access, right? Then try to enumerate permission and see what you can do, right? If you can do the privilege escalation and get the sensitive information, right? So what went wrong? Again, EC2 instance was publicly accessible and there is no input validation for the web application, and that is eventually leads to SSRF. EC2 role attached with the overly permissive policy. Data storage in AWS S3 was not properly configured in this scenario, and storing credentials such as admin credential in S3 bucket. So this is how it could dangerous. But in general, if we talk about what can go wrong, right? So the which I already discussed, misconfigure EC2 instance and the default settings being used. So we have covered only one attack scenario, but what are the other attack scenarios or the attack vectors you can look for, right? So if check for if public snapshot is available, check if AMI is publicly accessible, right? You are like another is not using default VPC, like if you are not using the VPC, right? Then again, EC2 instance is publicly accessible, right? Then unrestricted outbound access, then you are allowing multiple ports to open without putting any restriction. So these are the standards attack vector, instead of just looking for the web application vulnerability, which is the web application hosted on EC2 instance, right? Now, if you find the HTML injection, right, this is like a quite bonus tip, or you can say just tip from side. So if you find HTML injection, don't limit yourself, try to get the SSRF around it. Okay, so think of the scenario that you have the PDF rendering functionality and you are making HTTP request, and if you say H1, like I'm sending H1 tag with saying A and again closing H1 tag, and I see, yeah, in the PDF it's highlighting the A part and it's rendering. So what I just don't limit self that, hey, this is vulnerable to HTML injection. Try to see if you are getting the SSRF as well. So for that, you can use iframe. And after knowing that, hey, this is vulnerable to SSRF, then question to ask yourself if it's hosted on EC2 instance, right? If yes, then try to get the AWS metadata. And here we got that. And we have also blog around that at EPSECO, so you can refer to whole like what is the actual flow. Okay, so this is how you can escalate HTML injection to getting the AWS temporary credential, right? So this was my approach so far. PDF rendering functionality was vulnerable to HTML injection. Try to get the SSRF. Now application hosted on EC2 instance and retrieve the instance metadata, right? So, okay, so we have discussed all this, but what went wrong? So, like IMD VS1 version, so that being used, right? That's why you are able to get that AWS credential, right? And the application was vulnerable to the injection attacks, right? And because there is no proper input validation. Now, these are the standard misconfiguration I look and talk about, but other misconfiguration you can what to look for: improper credential handling, instance misconfiguration, access control misconfiguration, exposure of resource via firewall, like misconfigure firewall, like RDS. There are many things you can look for. The network security misconfigure, again, like you haven't mentioned that, hey, this is the inbound and outbound rule, this particular request only coming from this IP, right? Then RDS means configuration, right? So all are the other misconfiguration, that is what to look for. And just tools that can help you to speed up procedure, that is bucket finder, S3 inspector, then enumerate IAM to enumerate the permission, AWS escalate, which you can use this tool to see if there is a privilege escalation possible, right? That is simply help to find those. And yeah, these are the references. And if you have any question, you can ask me on Slack chat, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Yes, so all it's about. And yeah, if you are still not sure about in detail cognito thing, I can cover the mind map as well for this.